Good night, this beat.
So don't get confused. Mama got that noodle juice. Mama got that.
We all sinners, just sinning for our reasons. We tryna change the vision, cause they sentence us to seasons. We turned dope to hope, I guess we finally found our meaning. Cause we tired of the death by overdoses of our people, yeah. We all sinners, just sinning for our reasons. We get a neighborhood hope, feel like our only freedom. They judge us in their cages, then they drug us like we dangerous.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to Dope to Hope. I am your host, Eddie Roberts, R.O.B., as some of you may know me. And today I have the privilege of interviewing my senior pastor at Trinity Temple, Dr. Pete Palmer. Good afternoon, Doc.
Good afternoon.
How are you, sir?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, man, I'm glad to have you here. And today we are going to discuss one of my favorite topics, trauma. But we're going to go a little deeper into trauma. Actually, Doc has written his dissertation on this, so we're going to go into that shortly. So I just need to give you a little background of Doc. He is, as I stated, the senior pastor at Trinity Temple, but I need to give you his bio that I'm looking for right now. So please be patient. And here it goes right here. All right. So Dr. Pete Palmer is married to Dehilia Palmer. The Lord has blessed him with one son, Dr. Troy Levy, author of the Faith-Based Personal Finance Program. Shout out to Pastor Levy, the Blueprint and the Stewardship podcast that helps people understand the connection between money and their other most important resources. Their son, Dr. Levy, is married to Rochelle, and they have given Elder and Sister Palmer the greatest joy in their lives: Benjamin, Kenneth, and Isaiah, their 3 grandchildren. Dr. Palmer has earned his Bachelor in Science degree in mathematics at the University of Maryland. He completed a Master of Divinity degree from Andrews University Theological Seminary. He earned his PhD at Andrews University and defending his dissertation, Childhood Trauma and Faith Maturity in the Seventh-day Adventist Pastors and Seminaries. Dr. Palmer now educates pastors, administrators with the goal of creating trauma-informed congregations. I'm in good company today. This is the reason why I wore my glasses, because of his highly astute, esteemed, educated, and so many other.
Okay, stop.
Yeah, right.
Stop. Okay.
Hey, Doc, I'm trying to get some points, man. I'm trying to get some points, bro. But man, I thank you for taking time. And before we get into it, I do want to sort of go over a little short draft of your dissertation. So, Doc, unfortunately, childhood trauma is a fact of life. For instance, children lose parents, guardians through death or divorce. Children grow up in impoverished situations. Children have parents who suffer from mental illness and or commit suicide. In addition, more importantly, some children are mistreated, neglected, abused, end quote. So, Doc, one of the lines right here, you mentioned impoverished.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start there. How does poverty impact those, or does it impact those who grow up in poverty? Are we automatically traumatized because of our lack of resources, finances, things of that nature?
I wouldn't say that we are automatically traumatized by being in poverty. Now, the challenge is, how do the parents or the guardians who are raising those children, how do they relate to their impoverished situations? Some children grow up poor and don't really know that they were really poor
Yeah.
because their parents made sure that they got what they needed. Their parents never made money their limiting factor. Especially those who have trust in God. So if the child needed to go on a school trip and they didn't have the money, they would pray about it and the Lord would provide the money. And
Oh
so the
yeah.
child would not know that they were really growing up
Oh
poor.
yeah.
So poverty by itself. Now, let me, I'm sorry, let me make one caveat. What we call poverty in this country is probably should not be compared to poverty in other countries. So if you go to certain places, let's say on the continent of Africa, you have people who are in impoverished situations where the children's bellies are distended because they haven't had food to eat. You know, that kind of poverty that leads to famine, leads to that kind of distress. Yes, that is traumatizing across the board.
Okay.
Okay. So
Okay.
so we have to be careful when sometimes we say, oh yeah, we're poor, we're poor, we're poor. And yet you're still getting food stamps. You're still eating 3 square meals a day, right? That's poor,
That's the difference.
but that's not
Yeah.
poverty like it is in certain countries where children, mothers have to turn their faces because their child is so they have the distended belly, they're so skinny, and they don't have anything to give to that child. So there's a little bit of, I'm going to make that little bit of a
Okay.
distinction. But in this country, and we have some of that here, we don't see the distended bellies, but you do have pockets in this country where children go to school hungry. That would be traumatizing, which is what, yeah. So
No, and I think the pandemic brought out a lot of that.
yes,
Because we've seen, community banks actually giving a lot of food. You're talking about lines extended
yes.
around the corner. And from, you just mentioned, even though we have a social system, but it's still not enough. And, to this day, there are still food banks giving out food.
But let me go to the deeper issue, which I think you might be alluding to with poverty, which is when the school systems are so poor that the quality of the education is not there.
Okay.
See that becomes a challenge. Okay. When my poverty restricts me to a 6-block region where my whole world revolves in 6 blocks.
Yeah.
Okay. When poverty becomes the reason why I'm eating McDonald's every day instead of having really balanced meals,
Okay.
or I'm eating pork rinds and I'm
Come on
doing
now.
those things because I can get those for $1, whereas fruit costs more than pork rinds.
Food
See,
desert.
so yeah,
Yes.
when you live in a food desert because of poverty. So I don't want to automatically ascribe trauma to because you're poor, but yes, poverty can play a major role in traumatizing children.
Okay. So, what motivated you to focus your dissertation on trauma and how it impacted the church?
So my initial focus was on faith maturity, which is the second part of my dissertation. I was really concerned, how do people develop faith? How do people grow? How do people grow in their relationship with God? And I was searching for a topic for my dissertation when I talked to my dissertation chair, if I can shout out Dr. David
Yes,
Sedlajic,
sir.
who was
All
my
right.
dissertation
Sir.
chair. And we were talking and he started saying, well, have you ever considered the impact of ACEs? I said, ACEs? What are ACEs? He said, well, they're adverse childhood experiences. I said, okay, talk to me a little more, Doc. And he talked a little more. He said, oh, why don't you do some research and see if it's a topic you could work with? And I started to do the research and this thing just blew up. Right. I was just like, wow, this is critical. And so, and so as I was working on my dissertation, we became, between Dr. Sedlajic and myself, we began to realize, wait a minute now, we know all of the physical impacts of childhood trauma, diabetes, intravenous drug use, premarital sex. All of these things are connected to childhood trauma.
Yes.
What we hadn't looked at was, how is childhood trauma connected to my relationship with God? How does childhood trauma change the way I view God? How does childhood trauma give me deficits in my prayer life or in my worship? And so that's how I got to the topic.
Okay. And Dr. David Sedlick
Said logic.
said logic. He introduced me to ACEs.
Yeah.
I went to Kentucky to learn or to become a facilitator for Journey to Wholeness. And during doing one of the classes, he introduced that, and it just made so much sense. I'm learning about the Christian NA, the steps, but we had to go back because just the use of these compulsive behaviors, whether it's gambling, alcohol, drug abuse, these were outward expressions. So now, like anything, you have to peel back.
Yes.
And this is where ACEs, I was introduced to ACEs for my first time, along with emotional intelligence. So all of these things kind of tie in together. So if you could, can you let me know, what are the potential long-term effects of childhood trauma as we grow into adulthood?
So if I can give you just not just the potential effects, but how it happens. So what happens is that when a child is traumatized, they find ways to mitigate or to deal with their trauma. They try to either find coping mechanisms to help them reduce the trauma or to help them deal with the trauma. Well, this actually produces changes in the brain structure. And so, and if the child is traumatized enough, it will even slow down brain development, right? So these things are in our brains now. They become part of the physical structure of the brain. So those things don't go away by themselves. So we carry them into adulthood.
Yes.
And so compulsive eating, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, because we just won't stop eating.
Yes.
We won't eat healthy, right? All of these things can be, they're not always connected to childhood trauma, but many times they are. And so we find that we bring these behaviors with us into adulthood, not even realizing how we've been changed by the trauma we've been through.
Yes.
And then find ourselves unable to stop these certain, as you use the word, I like the word, compulsive, obsessive behaviors. We find ourselves keep doing things that we say, why am I doing this? What is wrong with me? And then and unfortunately, because we haven't spent enough time talking about childhood trauma, we come to the conclusion, I'm just broken.
Yeah.
I'm just dumb. I just can't get it together. Not realizing that it's rooted in some stuff that happened to us while we were children or even as teenagers, because when we talk about childhood trauma, we're talking about anything that happens to you up to the age of 18. We're not just talking about what happens to you when you were 5.
So Doc, you mentioned that childhood trauma and then how the brain hasn't really fully developed when this happened to us.
Sometimes,
sometime, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So just imagine as we start to experiment with alcohol, with these mood altering chemicals.
Yeah.
And now we use this, as you mentioned, as a coping mechanism. Mm-hmm. Now it's actually not allowing our brain to fully develop in so many different areas. So you mentioned that the compulsive behaviors now is routine, which turns into addiction. So one of the things that I read recently, that they did a test and they said obesity was one of the first signs of trauma in children, because we use the term comfort food, right? We done sweetened that and cleaned it up, sanitized, but it's not comfort food. It is ways of us dealing with trauma. Do you see that being tied together?
Absolutely. In fact, I mean, I want to be careful. We have to be careful because there might be some individuals who are dealing with obesity that is rooted in something other than
Okay.
their trauma.
Fair.
And I don't
Yep.
want everyone to say, okay, so I got to go look for trauma because, you know, I'm eating unhealthily or
Okay.
I'm an unhealthy weight. So I want to be careful about that. But on the other hand, this is exactly how this study into childhood trauma really got started. There were some doctors who were treating patients who were obese. And so they would talk to them and they started noticing a pattern that there was some kind of trauma that had happened in these individuals' childhood that was, and they started wondering if there was a connection
Okay.
between their obesity as adults and this childhood trauma. And so that started the Kaiser Permanente study, which happened in the mid 90s. And they went and studied thousands of individuals and started connecting all of these poor health outcomes to childhood trauma, which one of them was obesity.
Okay.
So yeah, it is there. You know, I want to be careful because sometimes there are other things going on, and I don't want to say that everybody who has this problem has been traumatized, even as children. But yes, there is a connection for some individuals.
So we've talked in one of the books. Actually, it was a sermon that you preached, and you there was a book that you mentioned, and I got the name of the book, but it's failing me right now. But one of the books, it led me to look for another book, and Mark Wolin. It didn't start with you. I wanted to kind of discuss that because a lot of times we think things are genetic. We blame our parents. You mentioned predisposition. But even with unhealthy habits, we don't have to take on that burden because my mother and father did it or my grandparents did it. So can just kind of clarify that all things are not genetically passed down, that these are some choices that we make?
Yes. You know, there is always the debate. The words are failing me right now. Between whether or not it's genetic or it's inherited, you know, inherited versus cultivated.
Okay.
That's a debate. But here's what we do know: that on the one side, we know that if your mother or father suffered from PTSD, they pass on a uh, predisposition towards post-traumatic stress disorder, meaning that if you then go through trauma, you develop PTSD quicker than your parents did. But it doesn't mean that it has to happen.
Okay.
Right? So if you don't meet the trauma, you don't get the PTSD.
Sure.
Right? But if you do meet trauma and you have the predisposition for it, it can happen. But here's the thing that happens, and nature versus nurture were the two words I was trying to remember. Here's the challenge that we have. We learn certain patterns of thinking from our parents.
Of course.
Right? So if you think the way they thought, you're likely to end up in the same places that they do. So if you as an adult now do not start evaluating the way you think, where did I get that thought from?
Yes.
Why am I willing to just cut off relationships? Or why am I willing to just cuss people out? Or, you know, where did I get this idea that somehow I must always come out on top?
Come on, sir.
Right? Where did I get that from?
Yeah.
Right. And you start looking at your family, you start realizing, wait a minute, this is the way my family thinks. For instance, I'll give you an example of what you were asking me about. There are families where we see the pattern of divorce, right? Grandma was divorced, mom is divorced, daughter is divorced, granddaughter is divorced, everybody's divorced, right? And we say, oh, that's a generational curse. No. You know, when I do premarital counseling, sometimes, you know, folks will say things to me. You know, folks will say, well, you know, you can't let them know where all your money is because, you know, you got to have a little something on the side and this, that, and the other. Well, wait a minute now. That thinking says we're not a couple because I've always got to protect myself.
Yep.
Well, the minute you start protecting yourself, you've already begun to step out on your marriage.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Because a marriage is not about protecting me. It's about me protecting you and you protecting me. But if I'm protecting me, then who's protecting you?
Sure. Mm,
Right. And so you've already
real.
already created some issues for your marriage that have nothing to do with generational curses.
Absolutely.
But you may have learned that self-protective behavior growing up.
Yeah, and I need to share something, because as you were speaking, I was thinking about some of my parental skills, and unconsciously I did the things that hurt me.
Yes.
So and I when I'm in juvenile detention, my father was one who says, "Hey, I ain't put him in there. I'm not coming there." And I started to bring on some of those same behaviors and how he parent with my children.
Yep.
And we almost want to look at our parents and put them on a plateau and says, if they did it, it must be right. Look at my outcome. But we do have to self-examine and then ourselves, and then look at how they were parented.
You mean you listen.
Come on,
you hit,
go ahead.
Now you hit on something really
Go ahead.
important. One of the reasons we struggle to forgive our parents is because we don't know their history.
Yeah.
Once you learn their history, that doesn't mean that everything they did was okay. That doesn't mean that, whatever trauma you might have suffered from them is okay. But it's a lot easier to forgive when you start to realize, wait a minute, they grew up in this a particular era. They, this is a really light example, but we used to have to eat everything on our plates, right? You were not allowed to waste food, okay? And when you didn't eat everything on your plate, they would tell you about the children in Africa who were starving, right?
Yes.
Of course, I was silly enough one day to say, well, you should take the plate to them. I'm surprised I made it to the age of 11. Okay, I'm surprised I didn't die that night.
Thanks for keeping it 100, sir. That's right.
But my point is though. But then when I learned later that my father was a small child during the Depression. Okay, so you got to go back now.
Yeah.
So he grew up in the age of the Depression. And my mother grew up shortly after the Depression, but those Depression era thinking was still there. I mean, you didn't know if food was going to be always there during the Depression. You didn't always know if you were going to have a square meal. And so you couldn't waste food during the Depression because you didn't know if food was going to be there. So that mentality stays with your parents now. So your parents now, there's no shortage of food.
No.
They're not poor,
no.
Right? But they still have that Depression mentality. So they pass that on to you. So now here you are forcing your kid who's full to keep eating.
Goodness.
So that they now become obese.
Goodness.
Okay.
Goodness.
And neither you nor your child is starving.
And I don't
but that mentality is still.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, because I didn't even look at logic. You're forcing someone to eat, and I did it because my mother did it.
That's exactly right.
So I remember my granddaughter sitting there, and besides the Africa, you're gonna sit there until you finish.
Yes, sir.
And it's hours later.
Yeah,
she didn't want it.
Yeah. Now here's the thing: what I do with my grandsons is this. No, you don't have to eat it right now.
Okay.
But when you come back an hour from now and tell me you hungry, that food's gonna be waiting for you. Okay. So it's not a question. I'm gonna force you to eat right now. Because that's a poor health habit. I mean, listen, we go out to restaurants and then I'm paying for the food. Then I'm going to pay to make myself sick.
That's right.
By eating because I can't waste food. No, I paid for the experience. I didn't pay for the food.
Yeah,
the food, it'd be cheaper for me to cook it myself.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So that's where we have to now evaluate ourselves and say, wait a minute now. Is what I'm doing making sense? And again, don't miss the connection to trauma.
Yeah.
It's either my trauma or, as your question first supposed, someone else. It didn't start with me.
Yeah.
It's trauma from the Depression, which here we are almost, we're just a few years short of 100 years past the
That's right.
depression.
That's right.
And yet the depression is
Mentality,
still,
the
the depression
mentality.
mentality is still
Absolutely.
affecting us.
So I want to ask you this question. What role do you believe early intervention plays in mitigating the negative effects of childhood trauma?
So when we talk about early intervention, yes, I believe it's very important. But the question that we must ask ourselves is, what is it that we're actually trying to do? Are we trying to mitigate the trauma, or are we trying to build resiliency in children?
Okay.
Right. And so, and some people might say, Pastor, you're splitting hairs. Maybe I am. But the point that I want to make is just getting the child some therapy is important.
Okay.
But what is more important to me is, even before the trauma happens, beginning to build resiliency in the child, because we don't know when the trauma is going to happen. We don't know where the trauma is going to come from. We might do everything possible to control our environment to keep our child from trauma, and yet trauma still shows up on our doorstep. There's a car accident and mama dies. There is cancer and daddy's gone. There is false imprisonment and daddy goes off to jail and he was actually innocent. There are a number of things that can happen that we can't control. And so it's really important for us to build the resiliency, and let me just break resiliency down. It's like we talk, I don't know if you ever played with one of those things that you hit, and when it fell over, it bounced back up, right?
Christmas.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. That is resiliency. It's the ability to bounce back.
Yes.
And that we must build into every child, because whether it's as a child or an adult, if you live in this world of sin, trauma is coming your way. One way or the other, trauma is going to show up on your doorstep. So now the question is, has resiliency been built into you so that you can bounce back? And here's the reality. We don't really build resiliency in ourselves.
Okay.
Resiliency is something that someone else does for me. They pour into me.
Okay.
They tell me that I'm valuable. They show me what my gifts are. They help me to explore where I am talented and gifted. They help me to see where I can use success in one area to help me with another area. So for the boy who is not the best student, but he is a gifted athlete, the coach says, look, you're a great athlete, but I still need you to work on your school and your schoolwork, and I still need you to put as much emphasis, put the same kind of labor that you put into your athletics. I need you now to put that into school. And that helps to build resiliency in that boy, because he now knows I can be successful at something. I'm not a failure.
Okay. All right. So this is off the record now.
Okay.
Right. Because we in our urban community don't hear words of affirmation a lot. We get a lot of the tear down, whether it's from our peers outside because of their trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go in the house and we hear the yelling and screaming, and dysfunctional at times.
Mm-hmm.
So when we don't have that person pouring into us,
mm-hmm.
and we're not building up resilience, what do we do when we're 16, 17, and we don't have that?
Good question. This is where I believe that communities of faith, churches, spiritual communities can play a huge role.
Okay.
If we can see that boy at church, one of us as men will recognize what's going on with that boy. We'll see him and we'll go, that boy needs attention.
Yeah.
That boy needs somebody to pour into him. That boy needs somebody. And so, hey son, how you doing? Hey man, you want to come hang out with me? Hey, you hungry?
Yeah.
And boys are always hungry,
absolutely.
right? So you're like, hey, you hungry, son?
Yeah.
Hey, look, let me go get you a sandwich. You take him out, you talk with him. He says, wait a minute, somebody cared enough about me. If the boy is aware enough, he can look for that. But most of our boys are not that self-aware.
No.
And so it really does take. And so it's the basketball coaches, it's the teachers. I remember when I was a school teacher, I used to rough house with some of my boys,
Okay.
right? And I know that sounds very, very wrong. Okay. But I knew that some of these boys didn't have fathers in the home.
Okay.
And so, and when I say rough house, I mean, I wasn't trying to hurt them. They weren't trying to, well, they were trying to hurt me, but I wasn't trying to hurt
Okay.
them. Okay. But we would just do some things. Like if I would slap box with them, I wouldn't actually hit them. I would just touch them like
Just let
this.
them know.
Just touch them. But I was showing them. Now, here's what a real man is like. And they needed to know that because now they're stronger. They're 14, they're 15, and they're stronger than their mom. They're bigger than their mom. And so they think they're men. And I needed them to know you're not a man. And if you ever tangle with a man, you'll get knocked out.
Right.
Now, I'm not hurting them. I'm just touching them. I'm not doing anything physical to hurt them. But I need them to know you don't really want to tangle with a man. So I was pouring into my boys and they loved it. Because, some of the things I would do with some of them, I was playing with them. I'd pick them up, turn them upside down, and put their feet on the ceiling.
Absolutely.
And they're sitting there going, this man picked me up, flipped me over. Now I'm 13 years old, and this man put my feet on the ceiling. Okay. I don't really want to. And I'm not trying to hurt them.
No.
But they need to feel the strength of a man.
Absolutely.
And we as men of God, particularly, regardless of your religion, as a man of God, we see these boys. Don't let them continue to go down the wrong path. Now, some of them are going to fight you. Some of them not going to respond to you. I get all of that. And here's the thing. You can't help people and not get hurt.
Absolutely.
You're going to get hurt sometimes. Sometimes they're going to reject you. Sometimes you're not my father. Who you think you are? Blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't change the fact that you be consistent. And when they come to themselves, like the prodigal, they'll come back to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I'm glad let's stay in the church.
Okay.
Because, a lot of times the church may say, pray on a situation. And we know that prayer changes things, but does the church does it handle trauma? Does it know enough about how to handle traumatic issues?
So this is one of the reasons why, following the lead of Dr. Sid Logic, we are trying to create trauma-informed churches because we really don't deal with trauma. One of the things that I have learned to ask, you run into the unfortunate situation. One of your young ladies in your church is pregnant. She's 15 years old. There are questions we need to ask.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. We don't need to just simply say, okay, we're going to put her out of the church so that everybody else will know to keep your legs closed, right? I'm sorry. Was that too real?
Sir. That's real talk right there.
No. Wait a minute. Where did she learn that behavior?
Mm-hmm.
Who touched her when she was 12? Who was messing with her when she was 6? And you may not be able to explore all of those issues, but there are some things that we need to realize something went wrong, and it may not have been sexual abuse. We know from the statistics that if you've had 4 or more traumatic experiences as a child, that opens you up to premarital sex much more so than the child who has not experienced it 4 or more times, right? So it could be the poverty, it could be the neglect, it could be a number of things. It doesn't have to be sexual abuse that has now opened up. This child is looking for comfort.
And you mentioned something, the question, Doc.
Mm-hmm.
The 7 primal questions.
Okay.
Am I loved?
Yeah.
Am I needed?
Yeah.
Am I important? Am I valued? So all of those questions, sometimes we're seeking them and we find them, and
we're looking for love in all the wrong places.
Absolutely. There you go, Doc. Absolutely. Thank you. And one who is have experienced my own trauma, and I have, I started to experience just acting out, as they would say, but there was a need, right? I was seeking something, and that question, am I loved? So I mentioned, getting in trouble early in the 5th grade. That's when the time I seen my father step up, right? I didn't see him all the time. My mother and father was divorced, but if I got in trouble, I seen him.
And think about what that did for you,
Uh-huh.
right? So there was a what we call dose response kind of connection there. So you saw that if you got in trouble, you got to see more of your dad.
Absolutely.
So what does that teach you as a
Absolutely.
child? Get in more
Get in
trouble,
more trouble.
right? Get in more trouble because that's when dad shows up.
Yep.
And so you act out more. But here's the thing, then you get to a certain age and you're still acting out. And it's not even about seeing dad anymore because it has now become a way of life.
Neural pathways.
Yes.
Right.
What I sometimes refer to as a life law.
Life law. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the way we do life.
Yeah. Now I'm past the getting in trouble. Now I'm not going to school. Now I'm experiencing with alcohol and drugs. So experimenting turned into addiction. Now I am self-medicating.
Yes.
Am I self-medicating to deal with these traumas that I was dealing with?
Very likely. There is we do want to make the point that if you have addiction in your family, you are then more predisposed towards addiction. And so for some people, it's not even so much about the trauma. All they have to do is experiment once or twice, and it triggers the predisposition,
Okay.
right, to addiction
Okay.
because they were already predisposed to addiction, and all they needed was a little push, a little nudge,
Yes.
and next thing you know. But yes, many people, I'll never forget when I was giving some Bible studies. This was before I became a pastor, and I was a local elder in the church, and I was studying with this couple. And when I would study with them, her father was always there, but he would be out of the room, and he drank a little bit. Well, okay, he was an alcoholic.
Okay.
So one Christmas, I'm talking with them, and just went over to share with them on Christmas. Say, hey, how you doing? It was Christmas Eve, and so he and I start talking, and then his story comes out. His mother and his daughter died in a fire. And then he was trying to get to the funeral, and through a number of mishaps and circumstances, he never made it to the funeral, even though he was traveling there.
Wow.
And he couldn't get that out of his mind. And so for him, drinking was a way of medicating that pain.
Oh, yeah.
So yes, your point is, yes, that can happen, but it doesn't mean,
Yes.
it doesn't mean that we're not, it can happen both ways, is all I'm trying to say.
Okay. So, Doc, this is real rich, but I have to just ask this last question.
Okay.
In your research, did you identify any effective strategies or practices that the church can implement to create a more trauma-informed and supportive environment?
Yeah. And here are some of the things that we can do. And I have them listed in my dissertation. I don't remember them in order, but here are some of the things that we can do. Number one, just inform the church itself that some of the behaviors that we see in the church are actually coming out of trauma, right? Just informing the church alone makes everybody a little more patient with each other. So that's number one. Number two, we need to help our those who minister to our children and youth, particularly, make them aware of behaviors that are connected to trauma.
Okay.
So if you see certain repetitive behaviors in small children there, or if you have children who just cry at the drop of a hat, we tend to say they're crybabies, but no, there may be something more there.
Yeah.
Or if you see a child whose clothes are dirty and stained, okay, that may be signs of neglect.
Okay.
And so there are things that we can, so once to make to create what we call a trauma-informed congregation, it means first we become aware. Now we make our leadership aware. Our pastors need to be aware. Many of us as leaders need to first be screened. We need to go through the ACEs questionnaire, okay, and go through. Did I see my mother
That's
being
right.
kicked?
That's
Did
right.
I see da 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 da? Were there times when I did? Because once you know your ACEs score,
Yeah.
right? Now you can then become aware yourself, because sometimes we ignore the behavior in others because we're ignoring the behavior in ourselves.
Absolutely. Or we can just wear a shirt with our individual sins on there.
Yeah.
I'm a gossiper.
Yeah.
Right. I'm a liar.
Yeah.
Right. No, I'm just joking, but you do need to be empathetic and internalize your own stuff.
Yeah.
I think me as a recovering person, I'm in recovery. I'm always empathetic to the person who is active.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I have to be.
Yes.
I was once I was that person.
Yeah.
And Doc, I realized that if we were all exposed to the steps,
Right.
and we have the commandments in the Bible, but the steps, everyone has a challenge. Everyone is a sinner.
We're all recovering sinners.
There we go.
We're all recovering
Man.
sinners.
We never get to this point of recovered.
Well, we will.
Well, yeah, but
But
right
we're
now,
not there.
We ain't there yet.
No, we're not.
We're not
In this
there.
lifetime, we will always be
Absolutely.
recovering.
That's right.
It's only
Recovering.
when we get to the other side
Absolutely.
that we will be recovered.
Yes. And until then, it's an action.
Yeah.
Right. We're moving towards a direction.
Yes.
But one of my favorite one, Paul, the writer of Romans 7:14 is one of my favorite, and it always talks about the nature.
Mm-hmm.
Long as we have human nature,
Yeah.
long as I pinch, if I touch and I burn, it is a nature in me to say, ouch. It is a nature of me that is going to think the wrong thing. But we understand that we have a God that helps us to overcome this nature.
It's interesting. We have for so long talked about these things in a way that is non-physical. It's just my nature. But what does that mean?
Yeah.
But when we learn that the brain, neural pathways,
Yeah.
when we understand how our minds work, when we realize that I can create new neural pathways,
Yes.
which allow me to deal with things differently. So where I used to cuss, now I pray.
Yeah.
Right. But it takes time for the prayer neural pathway to become stronger than
Absolutely.
the cussing
Yes, right.
neural
That's right.
pathway.
That's right.
It's not going to happen.
No.
And every time I indulge the cussing neural pathway, I am delaying the time when the prayer will get stronger. Okay. So when you
Yeah.
begin to understand those types of things, I agree with you. It makes a difference.
Yeah.
It changes. Not only do I have empathy for myself, which a lot of us need, but we have empathy for others.
Yes, sir.
But I also need some for myself.
That's right.
Because I am recovering.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just go away because I prayed one time.
Nope.
And when we have some more time,
Yeah.
here's one of the things we'll talk. I'd love for us to get into. How can you fix what issues that started in a parent-child relationship by yourself?
We could drop the mic on that one, Doc.
See, if it started, if the problem started in a relationship, then the only way to fix it is in relationship. So you can go pray, fast, you can go become a monk, you can go off into some place by yourself, and guess what? You're taking you with you.
Yes.
So you still can't fix the issue because the
Absolutely.
issue is not an intrapersonal issue. The issue is interpersonal.
Yes. So the opposite of addiction is community.
Yeah.
We need community. That's why
what did God say at the very beginning? It's not good
for man to
be alone.
Oh man, I think God was on to something, huh?
I think so.
All right, Doc. I appreciate you, and we will have a part 2, 3, 4.
All right.
I'm almost want to make you a regular guest, man, because this is good, man. This is really rich, and I appreciate your time, and look forward to the next discussion, sir.
Look forward to it.
All right, y'all.
The seasons we turned dope to hope. I guess we finally found our meaning, cause we tired of the death.